Hey guys, it's Nicole. I hope you are well and welcome back to another video. So today I'm going to be talking about some of the books I read in October. I say some because there was a whole bunch of books that I did read for a vlog. Some of them were the books that I finished off for my Emma retelling vlog. So if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on Emma retellings, I will leave that vlog linked up above. I think it's that side and down below. And I also did finish all the books that I needed to read for my next retelling video, which is exciting. That should be at end of November is the plan, so you'll hear about those books then. Unfortunately, that means all the books that I have left over to talk about in this video are all books that I really didn't like. Well, okay, there's two books in here that I liked. There's going to be a lot of ranting today, so that's not something you're in the mood for. You don't have to watch this video. So the first book I completed is The Bridge Kingdom. This is the first book in a YA fantasy romance series. We follow this princess called Lara, and she's grown up her entire life with her half-sisters, and they've been quite secluded from the rest of the world, and these girls have been raised and trained to be spies and assassins because their father, the king, wants to use one of them to marry off to this neighboring prince who is the prince of what's called the Bridge Kingdom. Plans for one of his daughters to kill the prince and help him to take over the Bridge Kingdom, because the Bridge Kingdom has a lot of access to travel and trade and just would be something really great for him to take over. Lara is the one out of all the princesses that ends up marrying the prince of the Bridge Kingdom. We follow her as she goes to marry him and as she lives with him. I unfortunately didn't love this one. I really wanted to. The premise had me very intrigued, and the first chapter, or the prologue, was so interesting and had me hooked, but from there it was a big disappointment. I really struggle with stories like these, particularly when there's a female character and they're either an assassin or a spy. I find authors very often play them down in terms of their ruthlessness. It's very obvious going through the story that you know that she's going to fall in love with the guy that she's supposed to kill, because that's how this book is sold, and it's also a fantasy romance. There is so little time spent with Lara's internal struggle of her changing her mind, actually trying to do the spying and the killing, that it just lost interest for me personally so quickly. I really wanted her to have like an internal struggle and for it to take a while for her to break down her walls and sort of change her mind. And I find it really unbelievable how quickly she changed her mind, because she's been raised her entire life away from pretty much everyone else, and all she's ever known is to grow up and become a spy and assassin to kill this guy. I just don't understand how quickly she can not want to do that, because it's quite common that you have these female characters that are often presented to you to be really ruthless, and then they're not. They end up kind of being like so many other female characters, and it's just so disappointing to me. That's why I think I just love Rin from the Poppy War series. Like what the author does with Rin from the Poppy War, she doesn't hold back. She makes her really ruthless, and I love it. I always get this sense with these other characters like Lara from this Bridge Kingdom book that the author's holding back, and she doesn't want to make her this really ruthless evil character. Like they don't even have to be fully evil, but I want some more nuance to them. I don't want it to just be said that they're a spy or an assassin, but then to not actually do or act in any way that resembles a spy or an assassin. If a spy or an assassin is presented to me, I want to see that. I also felt romance happened too quickly. I wanted more yearning. I wanted her to struggle over her situation a bit more. Also, another me thing is I didn't like how it was just these two characters and they were constantly switching between their POVs. I wanted to have the side characters more involved in the story, because they really did just pass through, and this could just be because it's a romance book, so that's why the author did this, and it could just be my personal preference thing. But I just definitely prefer stories where there's a cast of characters and there's more going on. There was just so much focus on these two characters' relationships, and I was just so much more fascinated by other things happening in the story, and I just wanted more. I might possibly continue on to see what the second book has in store and then make a decision if this series is for me or not, but I gave this book 2.25 stars. The next book I completed in October was another YA fantasy, and this is the first book in I don't know what the series is called, but the book is called The Shadow of the Fox. This book follows this young girl called Yumeko, who is a kitsune. She's grown up her entire life in this temple. She has been sort of taught to hide her kitsune side. So she's half human and half kitsune, which basically means fox. So she's been taught to hide her supernatural side. One day the temple she grew up in and called home is destroyed. That leads to her to have to leave, but she has to take with her this ancient scroll that is mysterious and powerful, and so she takes that with her and she plans to journey across the land to another temple to deliver the scroll. Basically, on her way she meets this samurai called Tatsumi, who is part of the Kage or Shadow clan. He is actually trying to hunt down the scroll that Yumeko has in her possession. She doesn't tell him that she has the scroll, but they end up teaming up and traveling across the land to another temple. So we already have like kind of this dynamic where they're keeping secrets from one another. Tatsumi as well has like this demon in his sword, and he's sort of partly possessed by a demon, not fully, but like he's in danger of being taken over control of the demon, so he has to try and keep himself in control. I definitely really enjoyed all the Japanese mythology behind this, and I think that will be a really cool thing to further explore in the future books. However, I didn't love this book. The main reason it didn't work for me is because it is told in multiple POVs, but it's told in first person, and it's very rare that first person multiple POV stories will work for me. I also just really didn't like all the eternal monologues that went on. There were so many, and I know that's very common in anime and manga, and I think this story does remind me and resemble anime and manga, so maybe it was an intentional choice to include a lot of internal monologues by the author, but I personally just didn't like it in the story. Like, I just wanted them to carry on with like their conversations and their journey. I also don't think there was enough going on in the story that kept me fully engaged, because the main plot was them keeping a secret of their true intentions and who the two of them truly were, and them traveling to this other temple across the land and encountering dangerous supernatural creatures and situations. There just wasn't enough. I don't know, I just wanted more from the plot. I did really like the ending, so I will be continuing, and I heard from friends that it gets better. I ended up giving it 2.5 stars, which honestly isn't a bad rating for me. 2.5 stars is exactly an average book. So let's talk about Solace. This book I really liked. This was a reread for me. I did read this with my Discord buddy read group. If you don't know, I have a Discord group that I just started in October, and in that I plan to read one book a month with whoever cares to join me, and it will be a adult fantasy book by a female author. So this was October's book, and this was so fun. This was a really fun book to buddy read because it's so easy and quick to read. It's just fun. It's just a fun story. In this we follow Alexia Tarabati, and she is what you call a pre-natural, which means she has no soul. It makes her very unique in this world. There's a lot of mystery behind what she is, and I'm guessing that in the next few books we're going to learn more about her identity as a pre-natural, because there are so few of her that there's not a whole lot known. But we do know that she is soulless. The way this world works is, so humans have souls, everyone has souls, and it sort of depends on how much soul you have that you're able to become a supernatural being. So if you have a lot of soul, you can become a werewolf eventually, and it sort of just impacts the workings of the supernatural, the souls, I guess you could say. And because she has no soul, she can never become a werewolf, but she can also never be harmed by like a werewolf bite or like by a vampire bite. So it's really, really interesting. That's what I loved about this. Just the small hints of the way the supernaturals in this world work, but also how they function, was so fascinating, and also how they function in accordance to the humans, but also how they've impacted history, because this is set in Victorian England. I will say, because she is a pre-natural and she's the only one at the moment known to be alive, there was a bit of a, you know, special snowflake. She was not like other girls. That didn't bother me a whole lot, just because like this book is just so funny and so lighthearted that the whole she's not like other girls I didn't take too seriously, and it was fine. I do hope though that it's not something that continues throughout all 5 books in the series, because I can definitely see myself getting sick of it by the end of the series. In the first chapter of this book, she accidentally kills this vampire and then is thought to have killed the vampire intentionally, which she didn't. And then very shortly after, there are more vampires who start to go missing, and people start to wonder if Alexia is responsible for these missing vampires. So she sort of takes it in her own hands to uncover what is truly going on. There's not a whole lot of plot in this, I would say. There was enough there that it kept me engaged in the story and wanted to continue to find out what would happen next. But I think what really kept me in tune with the story was Alexia. She's just such a sassy character. I love her and her banter with the main guy in this. They just have such good bickering banter. I will say the romance happens quite quickly. Usually I do like a bit of like yearning and for it to be dragged out, but I really think it worked in here because it's such a fast-paced book. So the way the romance developed matched the pacing of the book. And this book is just like such a mashup of so many different things. Like, it's historical fiction, it's supernatural paranormal fiction, it's got elements of steampunk in it. It just has so much going on and it's so cool, and I'm really excited to see where the next book takes us. I think we're going to learn more about the werewolves, that's my prediction, but I don't know what else. But there's talks of ghosts, which I really want to learn more about because I think oh, it's so cool. I think some of my critique would be is we only really get to know Alexia a lot, and then we also get to know a bit about the love interest, but again, not a whole lot. I would have liked to get to know some of the side characters more, which I'm thinking we're going to do in the next couple of books, so I'm looking forward to that. I will also say I did get a little bit tired of the constant way Alexia kept being put down by those around her, particularly like her family members. So Alexia is half Italian, half English, and because she's half Italian, she has darker skin and she has a big nose, and it was just constantly talking about that and referencing that, and that just got a little bit tiresome. Like, I don't think it needed to be repeated as often as it was, because it just kind of felt like we were being bashed over the head and constantly told she has a big nose and she's got really tan skin. I've got the point the first 3 times, don't need another 30. But other than that, I did really enjoy this book. I'm excited to continue on. I gave it 3.75 stars and rounded it up to a 4 on Goodreads. Okay, let's talk about Earthbringer by Brandon Sanderson. This book was my most disappointing book of the month, unfortunately. I gave it 1 star. Yeah. I'm not going to talk too much about the plot of this book because it's the 3rd book in the series, so I can't really tell you the plot, but I've also spoken quite often recently about the first 2 books in this series, so I just don't want to repeat myself. All you really need to know if you have not read the series is it's Brandon Sanderson's high epic fantasy that will end up being 10 books long. Currently the first 3 books are out. Book 4 is coming out in November. The other thing that is important to know is each book in the series does follow multiple characters, but there's always one character from the main cast of characters that is like the central character, and that central character, we get most of their POV, but we also get flashbacks and their backstory through the flashbacks. So going into this, I knew that the central character was going to be Delana, who is unfortunately a character I met in the first 2 books and found to be my least favorite character. But my dislike for him in the first 2 books was more like a petty annoyance. I kind of found him a creep, like especially listening to the audiobook for Oathbringer, the way he says his love interest's name, like Navani.
Delanar and Navani trailed after them. Navani, he thought, on my arm.
Creeps me the hell out. Anyway, besides the point, I just wasn't really interested in him. It was more of a petty annoyance going into this book. I was hoping that maybe I would warm up to him after Earthbringer, which is essentially his book, because we get his backstory, but I just was not impressed at all. In fact, I felt like we already had gotten his backstory. We'd had like passing comments in book 1 and book 2 about him from other characters and himself as well, and I felt like we already knew it. And I also think it's a sort of common backstory for characters like him that we see in other fantasy books. He is like this middle-aged man now who's very, very honorable. He is the uncle to the king, so he's high up in society, so he's just very respected, has a lot of power, but he was very different in his youth. I just thought it was so obvious what it was like in his youth. I just thought it was such pathetic character development. That sounds so harsh, but it couldn't be further from how I felt. I think the way he justifies himself and his honor, and the way he thought about his ex-wife, or didn't think about his ex-wife. I just kind of found him to be so hypocritical. I thought his character contradicted some things as well. Like, you know, we saw this character development from him, and then he has this conversation with his son at the end of the book, and just what he says to his son, I just thought contradicted all the character development we saw. I hated how he always thinks that he has this moral high ground in comparison to everyone else, and he puts himself on a pedestal constantly, and I'm just like, someone please take out the trash. I just really didn't like him, and I just thought his character development was so sloppy. I thought that with the other characters as well. Like, usually I really enjoy Brandon Sanderson's character development, but in here I thought it was so messy and just so in the wrong direction. There were things that I thought should have been explored for particular characters because of things that had happened to them that wasn't, and then there were things that were happening that I did not think should happen. One other thing that I did sort of question is the main female character in this. We start to explore her mental health condition that she has. Now, while I think that it's really great that Brandon Sanderson is trying to incorporate more mental health in his fantasy books, like there's another character in here that does have depression, I do sort of question and side-eye the fact that he gave the main female character in this story a mental health condition that has historically been referred to as crazy. Like, people who have this disorder have been called crazy historically, and particularly people who have those disorders historically were women, and it was these women who were called crazy. And I just sort of question why he chose the main female character and the most predominant female character in a very male-dominated story to have this disorder. I personally think he should have given it to a male character if he wanted to include this representation. If he had more female characters that were more main characters, then I wouldn't have a problem with it, but it's just the fact that this girl was like pretty much the main girl, and every other female character is basically just a love interest or a mother, very much a side character at the moment. I think one thing I will say that I did like about this was we did get to see quite a few different cities and how they work and how the state of the world impacted those cities and people, and that was interesting. But like, overall, I didn't like the direction this story went. I just think there was a lot of poor narrative choices in the plot, in characters especially. I just don't think a lot of these character developments made sense. Now, I do feel like I need to justify my 1-star rating a bit. When it comes to Brandon Sanderson, I definitely have a higher standard for him just because I've loved so many of his books. So if this was for another author that I didn't love, like I have loved Brandon Sanderson books, this book would probably have been a 2-star for me. But because I have such high expectations for Brandon Sanderson, even though I went into this particular book with expectations that I wasn't going to love it as much as the first 2 books from what I've heard from friends and just online, I still thought I was going to enjoy this and give it at least a 4 stars because it's Brandon Sanderson and he hadn't really disappointed me until now. So this book was just such a major disappointment, which is why I got 1 star, which maybe some people might think is really harsh, but I do think expectations plays into ratings. Like, we all say if a book surprises us in a good way, it impacts our enjoyment quite greatly, and we end up rating the book higher than we would have expected. So that's kind of my justifying my 1-star rating, and I think I would have been inclined to rate it higher if it wasn't for my friend Tammy from Tammy Tries to Read, who also disliked this book quite strongly, because I do find it a little bit hard sometimes to rate really well-loved books low, just because you can be so convinced you like them more just from what you've heard from other people and from what you feel like you should have liked. But this book, I have to give it 1 star. Those are my thoughts. I can't say a whole lot, and I can't say a whole lot in detail because it's the 3rd book in a series, but if you'd like to know more of my thoughts, like, leave a comment and I'll be happy to give you more in-depth thoughts and all that. So yeah, sorry to people who love this book, mostly Katie. I'm sorry. It really didn't work for me. The next book I want to talk about is a very short non-fiction book that I read that is called Women in Power, and it's a manifesto, and it talks a lot about misogyny. It talks a lot about women historically. It talks about how women are constantly referred to as whining when they complain about something. It goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks and references how in those sort of texts women are put down and oppressed. It talks about modern day examples, and like I said with the whining, it just gives other examples of how women are constantly forced to shut up by men. I really like this. It's very short. It really like just brushes over what is a much larger discussion. It was really fascinating. I have a couple of bigger books that I'm going to be reading about misogyny and just women and feminism. I like this. I think if you're someone who wants to get a little bit into reading these kind of non-fiction books, story. I really highly recommend this. I also talked a lot about weakness and how women are so often referred to being weak and, you know, damsels in distress. But just a warning, it does talk about rape and the Me Too movement. The author of this does give a very detailed description of her experience with sexual assault, so just forewarning. The audiobook for this was, I think, an hour and 20 minutes long, and it has so much to say, and like I said, it's part of a much larger discussion. I think this was originally a speech, but it's so important. It touches on so many important things that I think you can pick apart and really go away and research individually, because there's just so much to unpack, and I really enjoyed it. Didn't give it a rating because I don't rate non-fiction, but I highly recommend this if you want a short read on women and power and misogyny and history and how it's all gone down historically. Highly suggest this. The last book I have to talk about is called Dear Emma. Now, originally I read this in my Emma retelling video, but I ended up scrapping all the footage for this particular book because it didn't end up being an Emma retelling. I just had so much footage for that video, so I thought I'd just talk about it here. Now, I did read this last month, so I didn't read it in October, but I thought this was an Emma retelling because the main character here is called Harriet, and she runs this advice column at her university called Dear Emma. So people write in asking for mostly relationship advice to this Dear Emma, and we sort of just follow her running this advice column. We also mostly follow her having this crush on this guy in one of her classes called Keith, and she sort of wants to ask him out and have a thing with him, but it doesn't really happen. I didn't like this book at all, which is also another reason why I just didn't keep it in the retelling video. I don't understand how someone like this character could be giving out advice. Like, she's the one who needs all the advice in the world. She was so petty, constantly hating on the other girls, like such unnecessary hate. She was constantly jealous. There was constant Facebook stalking with this Keith guy. She would constantly Facebook stalk him, then like this other girl that this Keith guy was dating. It was just not healthy. She had this really big obsession with centering herself in every situation. Like, her friends would come to her about some things and she would just center herself on whatever the thing is. I didn't enjoy this at all, and I don't really want to talk about it a whole lot, but yeah, just know it's not an Emma retelling. I don't recommend it. There's not a whole lot that goes on in the story except for like petty jealousy and like, you know, a girl pining over for a boy, kind of manipulating other girls because she wants this boy, and it just wasn't fun. It was not a fun read at all, unfortunately, and I read the whole thing. So yeah, 1 star for that one. Anyway, that's it. Sorry this video was so negative, but let me know your thoughts on any of these books if you've read them, and I really hope that you're enjoying whatever you're currently reading, and I really hope to see you next time. Bye!